Flavel started the engine. Nickeltown, let's go. The drive was silent. The anticipation was a physical weight in the car. A barrel, a foul odor. It fit. It fit the timeline. It fit the horror. When they arrived, the smell hit them from the street. It was sweet, cloying, and thick. The smell of advanced decomposition in the southern heat. Officers had the backyard of a dilapidated house taped off. In the center of the yard, near a rusted shed, stood a blue plastic 55-gallon drum. Flies were swarming it in a black, buzzing cloud. "It's bad, detective," the uniformed officer said, covering his nose and mouth with a handkerchief. "We popped the lid. It's soup in there." Flavel approached the barrel. The stench was eye-watering. He looked inside. The contents were unrecognizable. A slurry of flesh, blood, and fluid fermented by the heat. Is that her?" Miller asked, his voice muffled by his hand. Flavel squinted. He saw bone. He saw what looked like a rib cage. "Hey!" a voice shouted from the back porch of the house. A woman in a housecoat was standing there, hands on her hips. "What are you doing with my barrel?" she yelled. Flavel walked over to her, his hand resting near his badge. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Flavel. We're investigating a potential homicide. We need to know what is in that barrel." The woman looked at him, then at the barrel, then back at him. Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. "Homicide?" she scoffed. "Are you crazy? That's the pig." Flavel paused. "The pig? We had a pig roast last weekend," she said, gesturing vaguely. "We cleaned the pig. That's the entrails and the leftovers. I just haven't had time to haul it to the dump yet. The heat made it turn." Flavel stared at her. He looked back at the barrel. "Forensics!" he shouted. "Get a test on that blood, now." 10 minutes later, the field test came back. Porcine. It was a pig. Flavel let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour. He leaned against the side of the shed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Dead ends," he muttered to Miller. "They're part of the job, but damn if this one didn't smell like the real thing." "So, where is McCall?" Miller asked. "She's not in a barrel," Flavel said, looking at the sky. "She's somewhere else, and we're running out of time." Chapter 7. The Digital Breadcrumb. Desperation breeds innovation. With physical leads drying up, Flavel turned to the only thing left, the note. Specifically, the email address. Grace. Be good at. "I need a trace," Flavel told the tech guys in cybercrimes. "I need to know where that account was accessed. I need an IP address. I need a physical location." It took 2 days. 2 days of silence, 2 days of waiting for another bag to show up. Then, a hit. "Detective," the tech guy called out. "We got a ping. The email was accessed on April 4th from a public terminal." "Where?" "The Greenville County Public Library, the main branch." Flavel grabbed his jacket. "Pull the security footage." Timestamp April 4th, 14 hours. The library was a sanctuary of silence, a stark contrast to the violence of the case. Flavel stood in the security office, watching the grainy black and white monitor. "Here," the security guard said, pointing a finger at the screen. "Terminal 4. Flavel leaned in. On the screen, a couple walked into the frame. A man and a woman, African American. The man was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a baseball cap, pulled low. But what caught Flavel's eye wasn't his face. It was his hands. He was wearing thick, winter gloves. Inside a library, in April. "He doesn't want to leave prints on the keyboard," Flavel whispered. "He's typing the death threat right there, surrounded by books and students." The woman stood behind him, looking nervous, scanning the room. She was small, petite. "Do you recognize them?" Miller asked. Flavel shook his head. "No, but Grace will." They printed a still frame of the video. The man's face was obscured, but the woman's was visible enough. It was time to find Grace Davis. End of Part I. The Scraps of Contempt. Chapter 1. The Offering at the Door. The air in Greenville, South Carolina, was already thick with the wet, smothering promise of a humid May. It pressed down on the city, holding the smells close, the sweetness of blooming honeysuckle, the faint metallic exhaust from the nearby interstate, and now, for Sue Bostic, a new, sharp, and profoundly wrong aroma. Sue Bostic was a woman of fastidious habits and concrete expectations. Her life was an exercise in order, spreadsheets balanced to the penny, meals planned a week in advance, and a front porch swept every morning at 7:05 a.m. It was 7:15 a.m. when the bag violated that order. It was not a crumpled paper bag abandoned by a morning jogger. It was a standard black plastic garbage bag, industrial grade, and it sat with an unnerving, deliberate stillness directly in the center of her small, immaculate front porch. It had not fallen there. It had been placed. It was perfectly centered, a grotesque, opaque monument to something profoundly malevolent. Sue's fingers, steady enough to manage the volatile finances of a mid-sized accounting firm, trembled as she retreated a step. She was a practical woman, not prone to superstition, but the bag felt less like garbage and more like a landmine. "I'm calling 911. What is your emergency? There's a bag on my door, and I got a threatened note on my car." Sue Bostic managed, her voice fracturing. "I don't know what's in it, and I don't want to touch it." She paused, dragging a shaky breath through her lungs. "Please send an officer. Now." She hung up, her gaze snapping back to her sedan, parked neatly at the curb. The note was secured under the driver's side windshield wiper, a cheap slip of paper that bowed slightly in the morning breeze. Its placement was a calculated trespass, a violation of the private, sacred space of her life. She could read the typed words from her distance. "This is what happens if you don't follow instructions." The horror was not in the object itself, but in the realization that someone had been here. Someone had stood on her porch, placed the offering, and pinned the threat, all while she slept. Her order was shattered. The detective's arrival. Detective Collis Flavel pulled up to the curb minutes later, the flashing lights of the patrol cars already painting the quiet street in jarring blue and red strobes. Flavel, at 52, was a study in controlled exhaustion. His face was etched with the maps of 19 years in investigations, 16 of them devoted to the darkest corners of homicide. He moved with a heavy, practiced weariness, the kind that only comes from staring too long into the void. He spotted Officer Odom and Officer Drummond standing near the patrol car, a palpable tension radiating off them. The black bag, now resting on the vehicle's trunk, dominated the scene. "Drummond, Odom, what are we looking at here?" Flavel's voice was a low, rumbling baritone, the sound of professional inquiry masking a deeper, weary anticipation. Officer Odom, a young man who still wrestled with the inherent cruelty of the world, swallowed hard. "Detective, you need to see this. We haven't moved anything, just opened it a crack to confirm." Flavel nodded curtly and knelt by the trunk. Odom gently unfolded the top of the plastic, revealing the contents. A shallow, disturbed bed of shredded paper, and, nestled within it, objects that were so profoundly organic, so undeniably human, that they stole the breath. The initial shock was not the sheer quantity of blood, there was surprisingly little, but the cold, dispassionate nature of the act. There was a severed hand and a severed foot. They were a deep, mottled brown, suggesting they had been refrigerated or at least preserved for some time. They had been removed with shocking precision. Not hacked in a blind frenzy, they were cleaved a clean, violent, yet remarkably surgical cut at the ankle and wrist. Flavel's clinical brain engaged, shutting off the human response. He was looking at a puzzle piece, not a remnant of a person. "Scott, are these toes?" Flavel asked, pointing to a smaller cluster of objects. Odom confirmed the grim detail. 10 toes, detached from the foot itself, nestled next to the hand like grim, misplaced marbles. They were separated from the main appendages with the same eerie, meticulous skill. Someone is using a blade, not an axe, Flavel stated, rising slowly. The horror was in the deliberation. Someone did this somewhere else, and they took their time cleaning up. This wasn't a spontaneous act. The severed pieces were a statement of extreme violence and cold intent, a declaration designed not just to threaten, but to shatter the recipient's psychological safety. We need the ME here, and forensics, and every available unit to start a canvass of the neighborhood looking for anything out of place in the early hours. Flavel rubbed the stubble on his chin, and I need to see that note now. The demands of the note. Drummond handed him the note in a clear evidence bag. Flavel studied the typed block of text. Every letter an arrow aimed at a specific target. Grace? This is what happens if you don't follow instructions. We know where they live. We know who they love. Your refusal has already cost someone dearly. If you wish to stop the rest of this tragedy, respond to this email address within 24 hours. shadow.player@hushmail.com. No police, no exceptions. Grace, Flavel read aloud, tasting the name. Miss Bostic. Who is Grace Davis? Sue Bostic, leaning heavily against her porch railing, looked utterly defeated. That's my niece. She used to live here, but she got into drugs. We had to take her children. They live with us now, me and my husband. Grace, she's drifted off into the streets. Flavel absorbed the tragic backstory. A mother lost to addiction, her children being raised by the dutiful aunt. And now, the aunt's house was the target. The threat was clear. You left. You think you're safe? Look at what I can do to the people who took your place. The patrol car radio crackled, the static suddenly sounding like a heartbeat skipping a beat. Flavel, we've got a problem. Another bag has been located. Address is 1412 Laurel Lane. Additional body parts? Detective. Same description. Flavel grabbed the mic, his professional weariness replaced by a sudden, cold urgency. Laurel Lane, he confirmed, his voice a tight wire. Is that Judon Burnside? Odom, who had been listening, nodded grimly. Yes, sir. That's Grace's mother. They weren't just threatening Grace's emotional life. They were meticulously attacking her through the entire support system she had abandoned. Her aunt and her mother, the two women who had stepped up to protect her children, were now the recipients of this escalating, sadistic display. This wasn't just extortion. This was a deliberate campaign of terror. The second scene and the ex-husband. At the second scene on Laurel Lane, the same horrific tableau was presented. Another black bag, placed with the same calculated malevolence, this time outside the more modest, slightly run-down door of Judon Burnside. Flavel found Judon Burnside and Sue Bostic huddled together in the back of a police cruiser, insulated from the second scene by the crime scene tape. Two women, united by blood, worry, and a shared, deepening dread for the daughter and niece who had slipped away. Mrs. Burnside, Miss Bostic, thank you for staying with us, Flavel began, his tone gentle but direct. We need to talk about enemies. Anyone Grace was involved with who might harbor this kind of malice? A relationship gone bad? A serious debt? Judon? Grace's mother was older, harder-edged, a woman whose face carried the permanent strain of past disappointments. Months. She's drifted. She got into pills, then something heavier. We had to take the kids. She gripped the crucifix hanging from her neck. Drug debts. That's the only thing that makes sense. Only her ex, David, Judon finally offered. He was ordered to pay child support, $400 a month. He hated that. They fought constantly. Money, revenge, the common denominators. Flavel knew that for a threat this complex, this gruesome, the motive was likely far darker than a simple child support dispute. But procedural work demanded he follow every trail. Did he ever threaten Grace? Or any of you? He said he'd make her pay, Sue interjected, that she'd regret dragging him into court. But this? Sue gestured vaguely toward the crime tape, encompassing the monstrous act. David's a jerk. He's not this. Flavel, however, needed to eliminate the simplest explanation first. They tracked down David, Grace's ex-husband, a mechanic working out of a noisy garage on the edge of town. He was loud, defensive, and immediately suspicious. I hate that junkie, David admitted, wiping grease on his overalls. She ran off, dumped the kids, and I'm the one stuck paying for her habit? Yeah, I wanted revenge, but I ain't chopping nobody up. I got a girlfriend now, detective. A real woman. I was with her, same as every morning, getting ready for work. David's alibi, backed up by his new girlfriend, was quickly verified. He had been with her during the crucial hours the bags were placed, and his work record confirmed his presence at the garage shortly after. It's a shame. It would make this case a lot simpler, but it's not simple. Flavel pushed the ex-husband aside. The killer was still out there, hiding in the shadows of a more complex pathology. The identity shift. The medical examiner's initial report from the crime lab reached Flavel late that afternoon. The forensic team, led by a tired but determined specialist, had successfully lifted a partial, clean fingerprint from the severed hand. The subsequent automated search of the APHIS database provided a match. Flavel stood in the empty briefing room, staring at the screen. The name that came back was not Grace Davis. It was McCole Harris, age 34. The case narrative disintegrated. The killer had not targeted Grace's own body. They had selected a complete, apparently random proxy. They had murdered McCole Harris, an unknown woman, and used her severed body parts as a brutal, theatrical message aimed at Grace Davis. The depth of the malice, the willingness to kill an innocent stranger just to send a message was staggering. Who the hell is McCole Harris? Flavel muttered, rubbing his eyes. And what is her connection to Grace Davis, or to the shadow end-up player who sent this monstrosity? Flavel ordered a full profile on McCole Harris. He learned she was a 3-4-year-old mother from a town a few hours away, a woman who had, like Grace, fallen on hard times due to a drug habit. She had lost custody of her children, but her sister insisted that she was turning her life around, working day labor jobs through the local labor finders. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he called her family. A death notification is always difficult, but explaining that their daughter was murdered, dismembered, and her remains used in a sick game was a new low. He only has parts of her, Flavel thought. The cold truth of the situation, a physical weight. How do you tell a mother that? He found McCole's mother, a woman named Mrs. Henderson, a woman of deep faith and deeper grief. Mika was my baby, Mrs. Henderson wept into the phone. She was trying, detective. She was working towards getting her life together and coming home. She didn't deserve to go like this. Flavel promised her justice, knowing the promise was inadequate against the scale of the horror. The second clue, the smell of death. The manhunt for McCole Harris's remaining body parts began with the full force of the Greenville PD. The entire city was placed on edge, a dismembered body, a killer on the loose, and a threat hanging over the head of an unknown woman named Grace. Days later, a call came in from the Nickeltown area, a neighborhood known for its industrial yards and lower-income housing. The complaint, a foul odor. 2 patrol officers, responding to the mundane call, drove down a back alley and were immediately overcome. It was the distinct, unforgettable smell of death, an unbearable, heavy stench that clung to the throat. It led them straight to a metal storage container behind a dilapidated house. The officers donned masks and lifted the lid. The sight was immediately and overwhelmingly repulsive. A thick, viscous sludge of blood and rotting flesh, filling the container almost to the top. "We found her," one officer rasped into his radio, his voice strained by disgust and relief. Flavel arrived, the metallic reek hitting him instantly. He was already directing the forensics team when a woman, gaunt and suspicious, emerged from the back door of the house. "What are you all doing?" she demanded, her arms crossed. "Ma'am, we're investigating a crime scene," Flavel said, his eyes narrowing. "Did you kill McCole Harris?" "A crime scene? Y'all are investigating the death of a pig," she announced, a strange note of indignation in her voice. "We had a pig picking, and we cleaned the pig right there. I just put the leftovers in that container." Flavel stared at the container, then at the woman. It was a bizarre, yet plausible explanation. Greenville was in the South. Pig pickings were common. "Forensics?" Flavel instructed, not moving his gaze from the container. "Immediate testing on the contents. I want a definitive identification of the species." An hour later, the forensic specialist gave the report. "It's definitely pig, detective. We're dealing with the remnants of a very poorly cleaned barbecue." The crushing disappointment was immediate. Another promising lead dissolved into thin air. Flavel knew the drill. You pick the wrong rabbit hole, you pull yourself out, and you find the next one. All right, pack it up. Back to the drawing board. The man in the gloves. The drawing board was simple. The email address, shadow.player@hushmail.com. Flavel had submitted the note for digital analysis immediately. Computer forensics now had a result. The email had been checked, and the threatening note had been drafted using a public computer at the main branch of the Greenville County Library. They had the precise date and time, April 7th, 10:15 a.m. Flavel was at the library manager's desk within the hour, securing the surveillance footage. The cameras were public, prominent, and reliable. The video revealed an African-American couple, a man and a woman, at the specific computer station at the exact time. The woman was not Grace Davis, but the couple had the air of perpetrators caught on tape. What struck Flavel immediately was the man. He was wearing thick, dark leather gloves. Inside the library, he's using a public terminal, Flavel observed, pointing at the screen. A computer that doesn't trace back to him. He's masking his identity by using a disposable email and a public machine. But he's wearing gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints on the keyboard? It was a perfect contradiction, the calculation of a criminal who understood digital anonymity, paired with the paranoia of one who feared leaving physical evidence in the most ridiculous place. The arrogance of the killer was now a tangible thing. "These people," Flavel said, his voice hardening, "they are our killers. Now we bring in Grace Davis. It's time to stop playing games." He knew he had to crack Grace. The women on the tape were not random. They were the architects of McCole Harris's murder and the source of the campaign of terror. And Grace Davis, for all her fear and denials, was the only key left to unlock the identity of the man in the gloves and the woman who helped him plot the most contemptible proxy murder Flavel had ever encountered. The game was about to enter its final, brutal stage. End of Chapter 1. The Greenville Severing. Part 2. The House of Broken Toys. Chapter 8. The Girl in the Shadows. Finding Grace Davis was less like a manhunt and more like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. She was a ghost in the system. No current address, no active bank accounts, a burner phone that had been dead for weeks. But in the South, family lines run deep, often tangling like the roots of old oak trees. Detectives Flavel and Miller spent the better part of 2 days knocking on doors in neighborhoods where the police were viewed with a mixture of suspicion and open hostility. It was a cousin living in a weathered bungalow out in the county who finally cracked the door more than an inch. "She's here," the cousin whispered, eyes darting to the unmarked sedan in the driveway. "But she ain't talking. She's scared to death." Flavel stepped onto the porch, the wood groaning under his weight. "We're not here to arrest her, ma'am. We're here to keep her alive." Grace Davis was sitting in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold tea. She looked younger than her 20-odd years, but her eyes held the weary, haunted look of someone who had seen too much. When Flavel placed the still frame from the library security footage on the table, she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just stopped breathing for a moment. You know them, Flavel said. It wasn't a question. Grace traced the edge of the photo with a trembling finger. That's Carmen, she said softly. And that's Clarence. Clarence Jenkins? Flavel asked, recalling the name from a quick background check on known associates. Yes. Grace looked up, tears finally spilling over. I lived with them, I thought. I thought we were a family. Chapter 9. The Triangle. The interrogation room was quiet, the air conditioner humming a low, steady drone. Grace Davis sat opposite Flavel, a box of tissues between them. Tell me about the arrangement. Grace, Flavel said gently. It started when I had nowhere else to go, Grace began, her voice gaining strength. I left my ex, Kevin. I was at a shelter. Clarence. He was charming. He told me he and his wife, Carmen, had plenty of room. He said they wanted to help me. She took a shaky breath. But it wasn't just room. We became involved. All three of us. A throuple, I guess you'd call it. For a while, it was okay. We talked about getting married, making it official somehow. I felt loved. Flavel nodded, keeping his face neutral. He had seen every variation of human relationships, and he knew that the most dangerous ones were often the most crowded. When did it change? Clarence, she said, the name coming out like a curse. He's got a demon in him, detective. He's controlling. He wouldn't let us leave the house. He checked our phones. If I looked at another man, he'd lose his mind. He started hitting me. Not hard at first, just corrections, he called them. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a faint, yellowing bruise on her forearm. I couldn't take it anymore. The abuse, the mind games. So I left. I just packed a bag while they were sleeping and ran. I didn't tell them where I was going. I just ran. And the threats? Flavel asked. The bags? He told me once, Grace whispered, leaning in. He said, you belong to us, Grace. If you ever try to leave, I'll cut you into pieces so small no one will ever find you. I thought he was just talking crazy. I didn't think, she choked back a sob. I didn't think he'd kill someone else just to show me he could do it. Flavel felt a cold fury settle in his gut. Clarence Jenkins hadn't just murdered McCole Harris. He had turned her into a prop, a gruesome billboard to advertise his control. We need to find them, Grace. Do they still live in the trailer on Parker Road? Yes, she said. But be careful, detective. Clarence, he likes knives. He collects them. Chapter 10. The Watchers. The surveillance team set up on a ridge, overlooking the Jenkins property. It was a desolate patch of land, cluttered with the detritus of poverty, rusted car parts, stacks of old tires, and a single-wide trailer that looked like it was being reclaimed by the earth. Flavel sat in the passenger seat of the van, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The heat was oppressive, turning the van into a convection oven. Movement, Miller said from the back, adjusting the long-range lens of his camera. The door of the trailer swung open. A woman stepped out. Carmen Jenkins. She looked disheveled, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. A moment later, a large man followed her. Clarence. He was big, moving with a lumbering, heavy grace. He was carrying 2 large, black trash bags. Same bags, Flavel muttered. Kitchen liners, tie knots. They're heading for the dumpster, Miller noted. The community one down the road. Flavel watched as Clarence heaved the bags into the rusted metal container with ease. Carmen stood by, looking around nervously, wiping her hands on her jeans. They're cleaning house, Flavel said, lowering the binoculars. 2 days after the second body part drop. They're scrubbing the scene. Do we take them now? Miller asked. No, Flavel said. Not yet. We need to know what's in those bags. If we move too soon, we lose the connection to the murder. Let them go back inside. They waited until the couple retreated into the trailer. Flavel signaled the patrol unit stationed a mile away. Move in on the dumpster, quietly. Chapter 11. The Residue of Guilt. The smell of the dumpster was a physical assault. a mixture of rotting food, wet cardboard, and sour milk. Flavel didn't care. He climbed in, his boots slipping on the refuse. He found the bags Clarence had thrown in. They were near the top, distinct from the other trash. "Pull them," he ordered Miller. On the tailgate of the truck, they sliced the bags open. No body parts this time. Instead, they found evidence of a frantic attempt to erase history. Empty bleach bottles, 3 of them. Rolls of paper towels, soaked in a reddish-brown substance that had dried stiff. A pair of men's jeans, stained dark at the knees. And a receipt from a hardware store for a gallon of industrial cleaner, dated the day McCole Harris went missing. "Field test the towels," Flavel said, though he already knew the answer. Miller snapped the testing swab, rubbed it against the dried stain, and waited. The tip turned a vibrant electric blue. "Positive for blood," Miller confirmed. "That trailer isn't a home," Flavel said, staring at the bleach bottles. "It's a slaughterhouse. We have enough for a warrant." "We need to be smart about this," Miller warned. "If he's got weapons in there and he sees a SWAT team coming, he might barricade. Or worse, he might have another victim." Flavel pulled out his phone. "I ran Clarence's file again this morning. He's got an outstanding traffic warrant, unpaid tickets. It's minor, but it's a key. It gets us in the door without announcing we're there for a homicide." "The Trojan horse." Miller smiled grimly. "Exactly. Let's go pay Clarence a visit." Chapter 12. The Raid. The approach was tactical but low profile. No sirens, just 3 cruisers rolling up the gravel drive, dust billowing behind them. Flavel and Miller took the lead, hands resting on their holstered weapons. They banged on the aluminum door. The sound rattled the entire structure. "Police! Open up!" There was a long silence. Then the sound of shuffling. The door cracked open. Carmen Jenkins peered out, her eyes wide and darting. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice high and thin. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Flavel. We have a warrant for the arrest of Clarence Jenkins on outstanding traffic violations." Carmen swallowed hard. He ain't here right now. He went to the store." Flavel stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. "Ma'am, we saw him enter this residence an hour ago. We have a search warrant for the premises. If I find him in there and you've lied to me, I will charge you with harboring a fugitive and obstruction of justice. Do you want to go to jail for him?" Carmen's resolve crumbled. She stepped back, opening the door. I don't know where he is exactly, but come in." The smell hit them instantly. It wasn't just the smell of poverty or unwashed bodies. It was the sharp, chemical sting of bleach trying to mask the metallic scent of death. "Clear the rooms!" Flavel shouted. Officers swept through the cramped living room and the kitchen. Pots sat on the stove, fuzzy with mold. The floor was sticky. It was a place where hygiene had been abandoned long ago. Bedroom, clear. Kitchen, clear. "He's not here, Detective," Miller said, coming out of the back bedroom. Flavel stood in the hallway. The trailer was small. There were only so many places a man of Clarence's size could hide. He looked at the walls. The paneling was cheap, warped wood veneer. He walked to the bathroom. It was a horror show. The walls had been spray painted a chaotic, bright red. It was a crude, desperate attempt to cover something up. But in the corners, where the paint had missed, Flavel saw the dark specks of dried blood. "He didn't leave," Flavel said. He walked back to the hallway. He noticed a seam in the paneling that didn't look right. It was slightly bowed out. He drew his weapon. "Clarence Jenkins, come out! We know you're in there." Silence. Flavel nodded to Miller. Miller grabbed the edge of the paneling and yanked. Chapter 13. The Wall. The plywood groaned and popped off its nails. Behind the false wall, squeezed into a gap between the insulation and the exterior siding, was Clarence Jenkins. He was curled into a fetal position, sweating profusely, eyes wide with animal panic. "Hands! Let me see your hands!" Flavel roared. Clarence scrambled out, stumbling into the hallway. He didn't fight. The bravado of the letter writer, the American detective mastermind he thought he was, evaporated in the face of real authority. "I didn't do nothing. I was just hiding because of the tickets," Clarence stammered as Miller slapped the cuffs on him. "You're under arrest, Clarence," Flavel said, his voice cold. "And it's not just for tickets." "Carmen!" Clarence screamed as they dragged him out. "Don't tell them nothing. Don't you say a word." Carmen stood in the kitchen, trembling. Flavel stopped in front of her. "You're coming too, Carmen, harboring a fugitive." "I didn't kill nobody," she whimpered. "We'll see," Flavel said. Chapter 14. The Clipboard. With the suspects in custody, the crime scene unit descended on the trailer. It was a treasure trove of depravity. In the back bedroom, they found the collection Grace had warned them about: machetes, hunting knives, a set of garden shears with rusted blades. But it was on the cluttered bedside table that Flavel found the smoking gun. It was a clipboard. Attached to it was a yellow legal pad. Flavel lifted the cover sheet. Underneath, in handwriting that matched the notes found on the windshields, were drafts. "Grace, if you don't come back, we have your friend. Do what we demand." They were practice runs, rehearsals for extortion. And next to the clipboard, tucked into a drawer, was a receipt for a pair of handcuffs and a length of coaxial cable. Flavel walked out of the trailer, the fresh air feeling like a blessing. He looked at Miller. "We got the weapons, we got the scene, we got the motive. But we still don't have the body," Miller said, looking at the setting sun. "We have hands and feet. Where is the rest of McCole Harris?" Flavel looked toward the tree line at the edge of the property. "They didn't put her in the trash, Miller. You don't throw away the main attraction. You hide it. We need to break them. One of them knows where she is." "Clarence won't talk," Miller said. "He's too arrogant." "No," Flavel agreed. "But Carmen? Carmen is terrified. And fear. Fear is a great motivator." End of Part 2. The Greenville Fragments. Based on true events. The Black Plastic Black. The dawn in Greenville, South Carolina, usually brought a humid peace, the kind of stillness that clings to the skin before the sun burns it away. For Sue Bostic, that morning was supposed to be rhythmic, predictable, coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the early light filtering through the blinds. But the rhythm broke the moment she opened her front door. It sat there with a malignant purpose. A black trash bag. It wasn't large, not the kind you fill with yard clippings or the debris of a spring clean. It was compact, heavy with gravity, sitting dead center on her welcome mat. It looked less like refuse and more like an offering. Sue frowned, the sleep clearing from her eyes. She scanned the street. The suburban silence was unbroken. No garbage truck rumbling in the distance. No neighbors dragging bins to the curb, just the bag. And then, the note on her car. She stepped off the porch, the concrete cool under her slippers, and pulled the piece of paper from under the windshield wiper. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, yet deliberate. It was addressed to a name that made her stomach tighten. Grace. The fear didn't hit her like a wave. It seeped in like cold water. She looked back at the bag on the porch. The innocuous black plastic suddenly seemed to pulse. Instinct, ancient and screaming, told her not to touch it. It told her that whatever was inside was not meant to be seen, and once seen, could never be forgotten. She retreated inside, her hands trembling as she dialed 3 numbers. 911. "What is your emergency?" "I need to talk to someone," Sue whispered, staring through the peephole at the black shape on her doorstep. "There's a bag on my door and a threatening note on my car." Chapter 1. The Keeper of Secrets. Detective Collis Flavel was a man etched by the job. 19 years in investigations, 16 of them wading through the crimson tide of homicide, had turned his eyes into scanners that stripped away the surface of the world to see the machinery of violence underneath. He believed in a simple, terrifying truth. Murder is a spectrum. There are crimes of passion, crimes of greed, and then there are crimes of evil. He was drinking his first cup of coffee when the call came in. The radio chatter was usually background noise, a static lullaby for the precinct, but the tone in Officer Odom's voice cut through the air. "Detective, you need to come to the scene, now." Flavel drove to the Bostic residence, the city of Greenville passing by in a blur of normalcy. People walking dogs, commuters rushing to work. None of them knew that the fabric of their reality had just been torn open on a quiet porch. When he arrived, Officer Odom was standing by his patrol car. His face, usually stoic, held a shade of pallor that Flavel recognized instantly. It was the look of a man who had seen something that defied the logic of the living. "What do we have, Scott?" Flavel asked, stepping out of his unmarked car. Odom didn't speak. He simply gestured to the bag, now secured as evidence. "Amber, you need to see this." Flavel pulled on a pair of latex gloves. The snap of the rubber was the only sound in the oppressive morning air. He approached the bag. He peeled back the plastic layers, preparing himself for drugs, for a dead animal, for a bomb. He was not prepared for the anatomy of a nightmare. Inside, resting against the plastic, were toes. Not plastic, not props. Human toes, severed clean. Next to them, a hand. A foot. The air left Flavel's lungs. He had seen death in all its forms: bullet wounds, blunt force, strangulation. But this was different. The cuts were clinical. There was no rage in the severance, only a chilling precision. The skin was brown, the cuts almost surgical, lacking the jagged tearing of a frenzied attack. There was very little blood in the bag, which meant the violence had happened elsewhere. This porch was just a stage. "My God," Odom whispered. Flavel stood up, his mind shifting gears from shock to analysis. "This is a message," he said, his voice low. "Someone is hacking up a human body, forcefully removing toes, cleaving a foot at the ankle. For what? To make a point?" He looked at the house, then at the note. "Who is Grace?" Flavel asked. "And where is the rest of this woman?" Chapter 2. Echoes in the City. The investigation fractured immediately. Flavel wasn't just hunting a killer. He was hunting a ghost named Grace and a victim who had been reduced to parts. The note was the first key. It was a manifesto of madness addressed to Grace Davis. Sue Bostic was Grace's aunt. The message was implicit and terrifying. "Do what we demand, or you will end up like this." But there was a breadcrumb. At the bottom of the chaotic scrawl, there was an email address, a digital fingerprint in an analog crime. "Get this to the lab," Flavel ordered, handing the note to forensics. "I want prints, I want DNA, and I want to know who is behind that email." Before the team could even process the horror at the Bostic residence, the radio crackled again. "Detective Flavel, we have a second location." Flavel closed his eyes for a brief second. Multiplication. The cancer was spreading. The second house belonged to Judon Burnside. Judon was Grace Davis's mother. The pattern was identical. A black trash bag, a suburban porch, a family connection to the elusive Grace. Flavel arrived at the second scene with a heavy dread settling in his gut. He didn't need to look inside the second bag to know what was there. But procedure demanded it. More parts. The puzzle of a human being was being delivered piece by piece to the people who loved Grace Davis. "I hoped the victim had died at this point," Flavel murmured to his partner, staring at the sealed evidence bag. "I hoped they didn't feel this." He sat down with Judon Burnside and Sue Bostic. The two women were paralyzed by a specific